Hello, everyone, and welcome. The King's Indian defense is an extremely reputable opening. I mean, it's extremely solid, and if you know the theory, you're going to land in objectively pretty good positions. But another property of this opening is that it's extremely tricky and tactical. And so, if you have a good understanding of some of the traps that can appear in the different positions, that can also get you quite good results. And so, in the video today, we're going to look at 7 traps that are very, very natural for your opponent to run into that will land you with quick wins as black. Now, I should mention there's a lot of variations in the King's Indian. You have the Samish, you have the Makhaganav, you have the Petrosian, you have so many. That's obviously not including the main lines. And so it's very difficult to get a good breadth of these traps down. So what I've tried to do is get you a different variety of positions, not only focus on the main lines, but also look at some traps that appear in some of the popular sidelines that you might run into. I should mention, if you're also looking to kind of learn the theory of the King's Indian, I made an entire masterclass where we have a video for every one of those variations that I've just mentioned and many, many more. So just in case you actually want to know a bit more than just traps and you want to know some of the theory involved in this fascinating opening, then I'd recommend that you check that out. But without any further ado, let's jump straight in. And we're going to begin with the Samish, which is a sideline that white can play. Very popular sideline. It's this move F3 here. They're solidifying their center. Just to clarify, the King's Indian obviously starting with d4, knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7. They play e4, d6, and here f3. So we're going to castle. They're going to go bishop e3. We play c5. Again, I explain all of these kind of beginning moves very deeply in the masterclass, so I'm not going to focus on the theory so much in this video. Although, these moves are logical, right? We're attacking the center. So c5, note that they can take twice and win a pawn temporarily, but very often we get some good counterplay. It's a very well-known gambit. Knight e2 is an alternative that they can play, and their idea is that it's a little difficult to develop here, right? Knight f3 is not possible, so knight e2 to go to g3 and get your pieces out is a very common approach with the white side. But this actually loses, right? Such a natural opening development scheme. But knight g4, bam, trap number one, guys. Take notes. This is just a beautiful sacrifice here. We're hitting the bishop. We're also, very importantly, opening up our bishop. And so after they take, we now have the ability to capture in the center. We're going to win back the piece with interest, because notice that in the end of these trades, material is roughly equal, but of course we have completely spoiled their pawn structure, and a move like queen a5 is going to take advantage of that. This is just a very strong beginning position for us. Black should be able to convert this quite easily. So that was trap number one in the Samish. Pretty strong idea. Now let's go ahead and take a look. After d6, what if they play bishop e2? And after we castle, let's say they play bishop g5. This is the Averbach variation. And here, the recommendation that I gave was knight a6. The idea is often to go e5 and carve out the c5 square for our knight, and you can see that happening here. Now, in this position, the main move is f3, right? They need to solidify their center, but you might be wondering what happens if they go b4. And people have fallen for this trap here. Now, it looks like the center is well defended, largely because of this pin here, really making this knight no longer, at least seemingly no longer, have control over the e4 square, but that is not the case. That is an illusion, because after knight takes on e4, knight takes, and now knight f takes, note that we can just give away the queen because we are winning it back on d2, right? So that's kind of a key sign. When the queen is on d2 for white, note that you have these opportunities to kind of take advantage of the pin here, and indeed kind of sacrifice very temporarily your queen. We're going to win it back immediately. Now, it doesn't end here, and you always need to kind of consider what does white do next. So bishop c2 is logical, but now we just return our knight. We're defending, and the bishop here is a little bit misplaced. Now f3 can kick away the knight, but knight c3, and they can take the pawn. It looks like they're actually doing some damage to us, but here we go rook e8. And if we sort of figure out what happened, Well, we've traded queens, but we've activated the knight, we've activated the rook, we've opened up the bishop, and this pawn here coming to e4 is also on the horizon. Meanwhile, they've just played with one piece, this bishop. And so, objectively speaking, we are very strong here. Note that they can't even easily develop their knight. They have to indeed settle for the very sad h3 square, but now we crack everything open already. They can't castle because the bishop hangs. I mean, this is a tragic scenario. They can move their king, but bishop to d4, and I think we can stop the analysis there because black's just completely taken control of the game from the get-go. So those were the first two traps that I wanted to show you. Now let's take a look at trap number 3, and for this one, I'm actually going to begin by looking at the London system. Obviously, something that has become very, very topical in these days, largely because of some online influencers like Eric Rosen. And so many people will just, by default play the London system, including against the King's Indian defense. And, there was an entire video dedicated to that in the masterclass, but it's a very tricky opening to play correctly. And so I wanted to look at a couple of the traps because black also gets some very nice initiative in my recommendation in terms of how you play, which is to immediately go for e5 as quickly as possible. And you can kind of see that happening here with the move knight to d7, right? We're opening up the bishop and the knight, and e5 is on the horizon. Now, there's a couple of moves that I want to look at. First of all, one trap occurs after knight to c4. So this is trap number 3. Knight c4, what do we do? Of course, we strike e5. They're going to take, we're going to take, they're going to retreat. Okay, everything seems okay so now for now. But after e4, the knight has to move. And here we go, knight e5. We're essentially taking advantage of this weak light square, right? This d3 square is indeed quite vulnerable, and that becomes extremely clear after bishop e2 check. And they're going to take, and you might be wondering, wait a minute, we just gave away a pawn, but here's the trap, c5, the queen's undefended, the knight is therefore lost. Really nice and smooth trap, something that your opponents might fall into. So that was one trap in the London system, but note that that did require their knight to come to c4 early on, and very often they're just going to develop their bishop instead. And this takes us to trap number 4. So bishop to d3, we don't go e5, it doesn't work yet, we want to prepare it further. Rook e8. Okay, so we're preparing it a little bit more. What's the idea? Well, after they castle, we go king h8. Very mysterious move. Um, but it's very useful because our idea eventually is to push forward with this pawn and with the e pawn, and so we don't want this diagonal towards the king to be exposed. And so this is a very natural and helpful move to play anyways, but it also works very specifically here because after king h8, note that their knight is kind of misplaced, right? Both of the knights are looking at f3. It wants to really get in somewhere, so whether they go to b3 or to c4, it doesn't matter which of these squares they choose, or for that matter, whether they come back to b1. It doesn't matter because we go e5, and we're already winning, right, with the pieces on f3 and d3. This trap is always something you want to look forward to because e5, they can move their bishop anywhere. Now here they're hitting the queen, so we temporarily first go f6, but ultimately the idea was e5 with tempo and then e4, and we're winning the material. And again, it was largely critical that the king was off of this diagonal because otherwise there would be some tactical opportunities for white, some counterplay chances once we played f6, right? So we want to get the king first safe on h8, but then this trap can definitely win you some games. And this takes us now, that was trap number 4. This takes us now to some final traps. So g6, this is just a slightly different move order, same starting position though. And here, one of the traps that I want to show was after the move knight to d3. So f5, again, mainline positions, this maneuver of knight e1 to d3 is something we explore in the masterclass. It's very typical. White wants to control the queen side in these positions and go for b4 and c5 ideas. But we play f5, and we go again king h8. Super typical move, again regarding this diagonal, but also maybe the knight wants to maneuver to the h6 square, things of that nature. And here's the trap that I want to look at now. Because very typical in these positions, if you've gone some experience, is that black plays f4, they lock up the position, and they go for a full-on assault on the king side. But you typically don't see black playing on the queen side. But what I wanted to show you in this trap is that not only is it possible to play on the queen side, but very often it's very effective to do so. So here, after c5, black decided to take. Strong move. Now after knight moves, c6 was the idea, and we're blasting open the center. We have ideas of just taking and winning the pawn. They can't actually save the pawn. They're already losing it, because if they take, queen to d4 wins the knight, right? So whenever they go f3, the diagonal gets exposed, and usually you can't take advantage of that when the center is locked. But by opening up the center by a couple of trades and playing c6, black manages to capitalize on the weak king, and this is indeed a strong trap. Okay, let's keep going. Trap number 6. So we have kind of the starting position of the King's Indian that you've seen many times. Bishop e2, the knight develops. We have castles, e5, we explode open the center, and the trap that I want to look at here occurs not after the move knight d3, which we just saw, but rather the very typical move bishop e3. The idea of this move is to go f3, tuck the bishop on the king side where it influences the queen side, but also influences and defends over the king here. This is a very effective defensive mechanism for white. But sometimes, if white is too ambitious on taking advantage of the bishop's influence over the queen side by, namely, looking over this a7 pawn, that can actually be kind of a bad thing for them. And you see this here, right? Knight b5, okay, heading kind of to these dark squares, but black has those very nicely covered. And so a7 is what white is really going for. And after g4, they go ahead and they pull it, right? They take on a7, but this is wrong, because the bishop is the only defender of the knight, and it can very easily be dragged away from its post, right? As I mentioned, the bishop has to do two things, right? Guard over the king side and the queen side. And here, black takes advantage of that by splitting its responsibilities, and it can't do anything, right? Um, if they take, we're going to take. If they take, we win like this. Note one nice thing is that if they decide to go bishop e3, okay, they're defending the knight. Here's kind of an extra trap of this video. Well, this configuration is very much a mating one, and so we just want to get the queen over here so we can just sacrifice our knight somewhere like knight d5, and after they take, queen h4 and mate is coming. So sort of two traps there, but the main idea is that if white quickly goes for the a7 pawn, distract the defender, and also this idea where if you get a pawn safely on g3, do all that you can by means of sacrificing pieces to get the queen over there and mate as quickly as possible. And for the final trap that we're going to look at, ladies and gentlemen, I want to take a look at the Averback once more, because there's another interesting trap there for us to explore. So bishop e2, castles, bishop g5, knight a6. We looked at this before, if you recall, and queen d2 was the move we looked at, where after e5, we kind of got this trap here where we end up being able to take the pawn anyways, even with the pin, because the queen is hanging. That was one of the first traps we looked at. But what I want to show now is, what if they don't go queen d2, right? What if they just play a3? And here's a nice trap to kind of wrap us up. They really should be going queen a2 here, because otherwise the bishop is very much undefended, and there isn't as much control over the dark squares, and the bishop is very stranded in that way. So here we go h6. And the truth is, they're either going to have to take the knight or retreat quite far away, because if they just go h4 here, bishop h4, without thinking much, g5, the bishop moves, knight takes e4. Really beautiful trap, because after knight takes, f5, the knight is hit, okay, the knight can move, but then it becomes clear, f4, the bishop is lost. And more than that, we've also kind of kicked around their pieces. We've opened up our bishops. Their king is still stranded in the center. The rook is opening up. I mean, we're getting a lot of play here for our pieces, and this would be a very nice way to play. So there you go, guys. 7 King Indian defense traps. A quick reminder, I did make another one of these videos quite a while ago with 7 more King Indian defense traps, so if you want more traps about this opening, then definitely check that out. Link is in the description. And a second reminder, if you want to learn about the actual theory, and again, there's so much to learn, right? We've covered only traps here, but in each one of these traps, there's a wealth of theory that you can really accumulate that will complement your understanding of the tactics. And so if that is something that interests you and you want to go a bit further with this opening, then I did make, again, a full masterclass where we look at many of the different variations. Much of the theory is covered there with PGN files, and if you'd like, link is in the description. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you're new around here, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.